You got a real attitude problem, you know that? The biker snarled, his voice a low rumble of contempt. He lunged across the bar, his fist closing not on her arm but on the front of her tank top. With a violent yank, the fabric tore open. The sound of ripping cloth silenced the room faster than a gunshot. The torn material fell away, revealing her torso to the entire bar. Patrons braced for the sight of fear, of shame, of helpless tears. Instead, they saw something that sucked the air from the room. There, etched in stark black ink on her chest, just below her collarbone, was the unmistakable globe and anchor of the United States Marine Corps. It stood proud against her skin, a permanent testament to a story no one in that bar could have ever guessed. The biker's hand recoiled as if he'd just gripped a hot coal. His bravado evaporated, replaced by a dawning, chilling comprehension. The quiet woman he'd tried to intimidate wasn't just a bartender. "My name is Lena Vance," she said, her voice low but carrying the calm iron authority of someone who had commanded in places most people couldn't find on a map. 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, 2 tours in Fallujah. And you just made the single worst miscalculation of your pathetic life. What happened next would unravel a criminal network, resurrect a broken town, and prove beyond any doubt that the most dangerous person in any room is often the one everyone has foolishly written off. Before I tell you what happened next, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what time it is where you are watching from. It helps more than you know. Lena Vance had perfected her anonymity over 8 months at the Dusty Spur Saloon. Every glass was polished to a brilliant shine. Every bottle on the shelf was perfectly aligned, and every customer was served with a quiet, efficient grace. She had become a ghost in plain sight, which was precisely her intention. Her dark, observant eyes missed nothing, yet revealed even less. Her hair was kept in practical, neat cornrows, and she moved with an economy of motion that spoke of disciplined strength. But life has a way of teaching us all the same hard lesson. The moment you believe you've finally found peace, that's exactly when the universe decides to test your foundation. It was a Tuesday night, utterly unremarkable until the thunderous growl of Harley-Davidson engines shattered the evening's calm, a sound like rolling thunder promising a storm of trouble. Lena's hand stilled on the glass she was wiping. Her entire body tensed, a subtle, instinctive reaction born of training so deeply ingrained it was as natural as breathing. The devil's daggers were early, and in her experience early never meant anything good. Jack's Reaper Slade shoved through the saloon doors as if he owned the very air they displaced. His leather cut was a tapestry of violence and vice, his mere presence enough to make conversation stutter and die, and eyes quickly find fascination with the floorboards. Lena continued her meticulous work, but her eyes, sharp and observant, missed nothing. She tracked his reflection in the mirror behind the bar, cataloging his movements, his posture, every potential threat. "Well, well." Jax's voice was a smug drawl, the kind bred from a lifetime of never facing real consequences. He swaggered up to the bar where Lena stood, his heavy boots thudding ominously on the worn wooden floor. "You're a fresh face. Ain't seen you round here before, darlin'." The word darlin' dripped with condescension, making Lena's jaw tighten imperceptibly. But she had long ago mastered the art of concealing her emotions. Showing discomfort was like chumming the water for sharks. "I've been here 8 months, she replied, her tone even, her focus still seemingly on the immaculately clean glass in her hand. Jax leaned heavily on the bar, invading her personal space with the unearned confidence of a man who'd never been truly put in his place. 8 months? Funny. Nobody thought to mention we got ourselves a new little poor girl." His gang members snickered behind him, that nervous, sycophantic laughter that always follows a tyrant's joke. Lena finally lifted her gaze, meeting his eyes with a steady, unnerving calm that held depths he couldn't begin to fathom. "Maybe you just weren't worth informing," she said quietly. The laughter behind Jax died instantly. Something in her tone, a complete absence of fear, had cut through the noise. That was the moment the atmosphere in the Dusty Spur shifted from tense to volatile. Jax's face darkened, his expression twisting into a mask of offended pride. Lena could feel the energy in the room coiling tight, like a spring about to be released. "You got a real attitude problem, you know that?" He growled, his patience evaporating. He made a sudden grab for her, his intent to intimidate clear. But Lena Vance wasn't just any bartender. As she moved back with fluid, practiced speed, his grasping hand caught the front of her simple white tank top. In his frustration, he yanked hard, and the cheap fabric gave way with a loud rip. Time seemed to stretch and warp in that bar. The sound of tearing cloth was a gunshot in the sudden silence. And as the fabric fell away, revealing the powerful symbolic tattoo on her chest, every single person in the dusty spur saw the truth about Lena Vance. And they understood that Jack's Reaper Slade had just thrown a match onto a powder keg he never knew was there. The silence in the bar was deafening, but it was the calm before the storm. As Jax's shock turned to volatile rage, the glint of a knife would soon break the stillness, forcing Lena to become the warrior she had tried so hard to leave behind. The glint of the knife in Jack Slade's hand was a punctuation mark to his shame. The shock of seeing the Marine Corps emblem on Lena's chest had frozen him for only a moment before his wounded pride boiled over into something far more dangerous. "You think I care about some stupid tattoo?" he spat, the blade looking alien and cheap in his grip. "This is my town. You're nothing but a—" He never finished the sentence. What happened next was not a bar fight. It was a dismantling. Lena Vance didn't flinch. She didn't scream. The moment the steel appeared, her entire demeanor solidified into something calm and lethally focused. As Jax lunged, a clumsy, anger-driven thrust, she moved with the terrifying efficiency of a programmed response. Her left hand deflected his wrist, not with a wild slap, but with a precise circular motion that redirected the force away from her body. Simultaneously, the heel of her right hand slammed upward into his elbow joint. A sickening pop echoed in the silent bar, followed by Jax's strangled cry as the knife clattered to the floor. Before the sound had even faded, Lena had pivoted, using his own momentum to drive him face first into the bar top. The impact rattled bottles and sent a glass shattering to the floor. She leaned in, her voice a low, controlled whisper that only he could hear, yet it carried to every petrified soul in the room. "That was for disrespecting the uniform I no longer wear." The other Devil's Daggers stood rooted, their brains struggling to catch up to the reality that their seemingly invincible leader had been neutralized in less than 3 seconds by the woman who poured their beers. It was then that the dam of fear broke, not into panic but into something new: courage. Jace Joker Whitaker, Jax's hulking right-hand man, was the first to move, but he didn't reach for a weapon. Instead, he slowly, deliberately unzipped his leather vest and let it fall to the sawdust-covered floor. The sound was softer than the knife hitting the ground, but somehow louder. "I'm out," Jace said, his voice thick with a mixture of shame and defiance. "I'm done with this. I joined a motorcycle club, not a gang of bullies who attack women." His words were a spark. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly owner of the diner next door, who had been cowering in a booth, stood up, her voice trembling but clear. "He took my Social Security. Checks," she said, pointing a bony finger at the pinned Jax. "Told me it was neighborhood insurance." Then Tommy Rodriguez, the young busboy, spoke up. "They made me pay them half my tips every Friday. Said they'd burn down my mom's house if I didn't." One by one, the stories tumbled out. A chorus of suppressed grievances and quiet suffering, now given voice by the undeniable proof that their tormentor could be beaten. The bar, once a place of quiet fear, was transforming into a courtroom, and Lena Vance was the unexpected judge who had finally gavelled it to order. When Sheriff Maya Valdez and her deputies arrived, summoned by a frantic cook from the kitchen, they found a scene that defied explanation. Jack Slade was zip-tied with the very plastic bands the Dusty Spur used for its lunch specials, and a room full of people were all talking at once, eager to give statements. As Jax was led away, spitting curses and promises of retaliation, he locked eyes with Lena. The look she gave him wasn't one of victory or gloating. It was a flat promise of consequences. It was the look of a woman who had just remembered who she was, and the world she had just stepped back into was about to become infinitely more complicated. Lena stood by the broken glass, her torn shirt held closed with one hand, watching the red and blue lights paint the saloon walls. The invisibility she had cherished was gone, shredded as completely as her tank top. In its place was a different kind of silence, the heavy, expectant quiet that follows the first clap of thunder in a long, dormant storm. She had stopped a battle, but she had undoubtedly started a war. But Lena's victory came with a price. By exposing herself, she shattered the peaceful life she built. And as Jack Slade was taken to jail, a dangerous new player was already moving in the shadows. Someone who had been waiting for just this moment to seize power. The red and blue lights faded, taking Jack Slade and the immediate threat with them. But the silence they left behind in the dusty spur was fragile, charged with the aftershock of what had transpired. All eyes were on Lena Vance, who still stood behind the bar, her torn shirt clutched closed. The symbol of her past service was now a beacon in the present, changing how everyone saw her, and more importantly, how she saw herself. Old Frank was the first to move, shuffling over with a clean, gray, dusty Spur staff t-shirt. His gnarled hands trembled slightly as he handed it to her. "Figured you might need this, Lena," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Or should I call you Sergeant?" "Lena's fine, Frank," she replied softly, pulling the shirt over her head, covering the tattoo but not its meaning. "It's still me." But they both knew that wasn't entirely true. The invisible wall she had maintained for 8 months had been demolished. As she moved to clean up the shattered glass, a young man she recognized as a regular approached, his posture unnaturally stiff. "Ma'am," he said, the respect in his voice palpable. "I'm Jason, 101st Airborne. 2 tours. Just wanted to say thank you." It wasn't just a thanks for stopping a bully, it was a recognition, a silent salute from one soldier to another. This single interaction opened the floodgates. Throughout the rest of the evening, patrons didn't just order drinks, they stopped to talk. They shared hesitant smiles, words of gratitude, and for the first time in years, a sense of collective relief hung in the air, mingling with the scent of beer and polish. The dusty spur felt less like a target and more like a sanctuary. Later, as Lena counted the till, Frank leaned against the bar. "You know this ain't over, right?" Jack's was the fist, but he wasn't the brain. "Someone else has been pulling the strings since old Silas, the previous chapter president, retired." Lena nodded, her military mind already running threat assessments. "I know. This was a skirmish, not the war." What Frank didn't know, what none of them knew, was the internal war raging within Lena. The fluid, violent motions she had used to disarm Jax had felt like coming home. The calm that had descended over her in the fight was more familiar than any peace she'd found polishing glasses. It terrified her. She had embraced the identity of a healer, a quiet presence. But the warrior's call was a siren song, tempting and destructive. The next morning, the story began to ripple outward. At the local grocery store, Lena noticed the change. Where once people offered polite nods, they now met her gaze with a new, unwavering respect. Mrs. Henderson pressed a fresh apple pie into her hands, refusing payment. "For the house," she insisted, her eyes glistening. But not all attention was welcome. As Lena walked back to her small apartment above the hardware store, she noticed a lone man on a motorcycle parked down the street. He wasn't a devil's dagger. His leather cut was plain, his bike unmarked. He made no move toward her, just watched. When she stared back, he gave a slow, deliberate nod before kick-starting his engine and riding away. It was a message. "We see you." That evening, a new face appeared at the dusty spur. A woman in her late 40s with a sharp gaze and an athletic build took a seat at the end of the bar. She ordered a whiskey, neat, and when Lena served her, she didn't just take the drink. "Lena Vance," the woman said, not as a question. She slid a business card across the polished wood. It read, "Sheriff Maya Valdez. I think we need to talk, off the record." Once the late-night crowd thinned, Sheriff Valdez laid it out. "Jax is facing a laundry list of charges thanks to the dozen statements we got, but he's not talking. He's scared of something or someone more than he's scared of prison." "The new head of the Daggers?" Lena guessed, wiping down the bar. "His name is Silas Viper Morrison. Jax's uncle. Smarter, colder, and he's been consolidating power in the next county over. Jax's failure here is an opportunity for him. He'll come to assert control and he'll see you as the primary obstacle." The sheriff looked at Lena, her expression grim. "I can't protect you 24/7. My resources are stretched thin. I need to know what you're planning to do." Lena looked around the bar she had come to think of as home. She saw Frank laughing with a customer, saw the new relaxed postures of the regulars. She thought of Mrs. Henderson's pie and the young veteran's gratitude. "I'm not planning on doing anything, Sheriff," Lena said, her voice low. "I'm done looking for fights." Valdez studied her, seeing the conflict behind the calm eyes. "Sometimes," the sheriff said, finishing her whiskey, "the fight doesn't ask for your plans. It just shows up. And from what I saw yesterday, you're not someone who knows how to run from one." After the sheriff left, Lena stood in the empty bar, the truth of those words settling in her bones. She was a protector. It was in her DNA, etched into her spirit as permanently as the ink on her chest. Hiding hadn't healed her. It had only made her feel powerless. As she turned off the lights, she made a decision. She wouldn't seek out the storm, but she would no longer hide from it. She would fortify her position, assess her assets, and prepare. Because Viper Morrison was coming and Lena Vance would be ready. But Lena's resolve would be tested faster than anyone expected. The very next day, a chilling discovery at the edge of town proved that Viper's reach was longer, and his methods far more cruel than anyone had imagined. The discovery was made by Tommy Rodriguez, the busboy, on his way to open the diner for the morning shift. He saw it propped against the back door of the dusty spur, illuminated by the weak dawn light. It wasn't a threat written in words, but in flesh and blood. It was Jace Joker Whitaker's discarded Devil's Daggers vest, or what was left of it. The leather was shredded as if by a wild animal or a set of brutal knives, but it was what was smeared across the defaced club emblem that made Tommy's blood run cold. A dark, rust-brown stain of dried blood. There was no body, no note, just this gruesome trophy left as a statement. By the time Lena arrived to help Frank with a morning delivery, the sheriff was already there, her face a grim mask as she bagged the vest. The small crowd that had gathered outside the bar fell silent as Lena approached. Their eyes, once full of gratitude, now held a fresh, simmering fear. "This changes things," Sheriff Valdez said quietly, pulling Lena aside. "This isn't a brawl. This is a message. Viper isn't just claiming territory, he's purging disloyalty and sending a warning to anyone else who might think of stepping out of line." Jace's defiance made him an example. Lena stared at the evidence bag, her stomach churning. Jace had been the first to find his courage, the first to publicly break ranks. And for that, he had been disappeared. The calculation was cold and effective. It was a tactic designed to terrorize, to make people question whether the safety they'd felt was just an illusion. "He's smart," Lena said, her voice low and steady, though a cold fury was building within her. "He's not coming at me directly. He's attacking the community's morale. He's showing them that my protection has limits." "Exactly," the sheriff nodded. "He's forcing you to overextend, to play whack-a-mole while he remains in the shadows. What are you going to do?" Lena didn't answer immediately. She turned and looked at the faces of the people gathered. Frank, Mrs. Henderson, Tommy, and others. She saw the hope from the previous night beginning to crack, ready to be replaced by a deeper, more resigned fear. She couldn't fight this with her hands alone. She couldn't be everywhere at once. She wasn't just one woman anymore, she was a symbol, and symbols needed an army. Later that afternoon, she didn't open the bar. Instead, she asked Frank to gather a specific group of people, every veteran who had quietly identified themselves to her, and every business owner who had paid the Daggers insurance. They crowded into the back room of the dusty spur, the air thick with anxiety. Lena stood before them, no longer in a bartender's shirt, but in a simple black tank top, the Marine insignia on full display. "Viper took Jace to scare you," she began, her voice cutting through the murmur. "He wants you to think that nothing has changed, that standing up is a death sentence. He wants you to look at me and see one woman who got lucky." She paused, letting her gaze sweep over them. "But he's wrong." She laid out a plan, not as a soldier giving orders, but as a community leader proposing a defense. "First, we stop being easy targets," she said. "We create a phone tree. Any sign of the Daggers, any suspicious activity, you call 2 people and it cascades. Sheriff Valdez gets a call and so do I." Nods of agreement spread through the room. "Second," she continued, "we use our skills. Jimmy, you were a comms specialist. I need you to help set up a simple, secure group chat for us all. Sarah, you were a medic. Run a basic first aid class behind the bar this weekend. We need to be ready for anything." She was met with determined looks. They were no longer just victims. They were being given roles, a mission. "Third and most important," Lena said, her voice softening slightly, "we watch out for each other. Nobody walks to their car alone at night. We check in. We become a unit. We are his territory now, and we defend our own." The meeting ended not with fear, but with a renewed sense of purpose. As people filed out, making plans and exchanging numbers, Frank stayed behind. "He'll come for you directly now, you know," Frank said, his voice heavy with concern. "You're organizing. That makes you the #1 target." "I'm counting on it," Lena replied, her eyes hardening. "Let him waste his energy trying to get to me. It means he's not focusing on them. I'm the hard target, Frank. They're the soft ones he can bully. I need him to look at me." That night, as Lena double-checked the locks on the saloon, her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. The sergeant rallies her. "Troops. Cute. A cornered animal is most dangerous when it thinks it has a pack. But even the strongest wolf can be put down." Lena didn't respond. She simply saved the number. Viper was watching just as she expected. He saw the community organizing and saw it as a threat. Good. Let him. The first move in their Cold War had been made. Lena had raised the stakes, transforming a scattered community into a nascent militia. The quiet bartender was gone. In her place was a commander, preparing her people for a siege she knew was inevitable. The battle for the town's soul was now officially underway. But Viper's response was faster and more brutal than anyone could have predicted. The very next night, the community's newfound unity would be tested by a fire that threatened to destroy everything Lena was trying to protect. The call came at 2:17 a.m. Lena was already awake, the hypervigilance she'd tried to suppress now fully re-engaged as her nightly companion. It was Jimmy, his voice tight with panic over the phone tree's group line. "It's the diner, Mrs. Henderson's place. It's on fire!" Lena was out the door in less than a minute, pulling on her boots as she ran downstairs. The cold night air was already tainted with the acrid smell of burning wood and plastic. In the distance, she could see an angry orange glow painting the sky above Main Street. By the time she arrived, the scene was chaos. The town's single fire engine was already there, its crew battling the flames that licked hungrily from the diner's windows. Sheriff Valdez was directing onlookers to stay back, her face illuminated by the hellish light. And then Lena saw Mrs. Henderson wrapped in a shock blanket, sobbing as she watched her life's work be consumed. But amidst the chaos, something else was happening. The phone tree had worked. The community was responding. Frank was already there, organizing a bucket chain from the hardware store's external spigot to help dampen the adjacent building and prevent the fire from spreading. Tommy Rodriguez and other younger locals were helping the fire crew move equipment. Sarah Chen, the former Navy medic, had set up a makeshift triage area on the sidewalk with a first aid kit, ready for any injuries. Lena went straight to Mrs. Henderson, kneeling beside her. "Are you hurt?" The old woman shook her head, tears cutting clean paths through the soot on her cheeks. "They called me an hour ago. A blocked number, said this was what happens to businesses with loose lips." She gripped Lena's arm, her fingers like ice. "They did this because I talked to the sheriff." A cold, clean rage settled over Lena. This was Viper's true countermove. Not a direct attack on her, but a brutal punishment aimed at the most vulnerable to prove his point. Defiance has a cost. She stood and her eyes met Sheriff Valdez's across the crowd. The sheriff gave a grim shake of her head. It was arson. They both knew it. As the fire crew finally began to gain control, a new figure emerged from the shadows of an alley across the street. It was the same unmarked biker Lena had seen days before. He stood there watching, a faint smirk visible on his face in the flickering light. He made no threatening moves, he just observed, documenting the terror for his master. But then, something shifted. The community, instead of being cowed, seemed to harden. They saw the smirk. They saw Mrs. Henderson's devastation, and they saw each other working together. Frank walked over to Lena, his face grim. "We have a problem. The fire chief says the water pressure's been tampered with." The hydrant closest to the diner was nearly dry. Lena's mind, trained in tactics and sabotage, immediately understood. This wasn't just a Molotov cocktail thrown through a window. This was a coordinated intelligence strike. They had crippled the response to maximize the damage. "He has someone on the inside," Lena murmured to Frank and the sheriff. "Someone with town knowledge. Someone who knows about the water lines." The revelation was a poison pill. Viper wasn't just an external threat, he had local roots. The trust they were building was already being undermined. As dawn began to break, revealing the smoldering blackened skeleton of the diner, the community gathered in the street covered in soot and exhaustion. The initial panic had been replaced by a weary, determined anger. Lena climbed onto the back of a pickup truck so everyone could see her. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. The crowd fell silent, waiting. "They thought this fire would break us," she said, her voice carrying in the crisp morning air. "They thought we would see this and learn to be afraid again." She pointed to the ruins. "This is the cost of their fear. But look around you." She gestured to the bucket line. "The medics, the people supporting Mrs. Henderson. This is the strength of our community. They want to fight with matches and cowardice. We will fight by building each other back up. We start rebuilding today, right now." A cheer went up, raw and powerful. The smirk vanished from the biker's face across the street. He turned and disappeared into the alley, his message received and thrown back in his face. But as the crowd moved to action, Sheriff Valdez pulled Lena aside, holding out her phone. She had just received a text from an anonymous number, a single chilling sentence that proved the war was far from over. "A fire warms the body, but fear chills the soul. Yours is next, Sergeant." The community had passed its first test, but Viper's network ran deeper than anyone knew. The very next day, a betrayal from within their own ranks would reveal a traitor, forcing Lena to make an impossible choice between justice and mercy. The text message burned in Lena's mind. "Yours is next, Sergeant." It wasn't the threat that chilled her, but the implication. Viper knew about the community meeting. He knew about their plans. The leak was real and it was close. The next morning, the scent of smoke still hung heavy over the town, a constant reminder of their vulnerability. Lena gathered her core group, Frank, Sheriff Valdez, Sarah Chen, and a few other veterans, in the back room of the dusty spur. The mood was somber. "It's one of us," Frank stated bluntly, his usual warmth gone. "Someone in this room or someone they talk to is feeding Viper information." A tense silence fell. Eyes darted around the table, trust eroding before it had fully taken root. Lena remained calm. She placed her phone on the table, the sheriff's text displayed. The fire was too coordinated. The water main was sabotaged by someone who knew exactly which valve to close to minimize pressure to that hydrant. That's not common knowledge. Her eyes settled on Jimmy Patterson, the Army engineer she'd tasked with setting up their communications. He'd also been the one weeks ago to complain about the town's aging water system during a casual conversation at the bar. He had the knowledge. He had the access. Jimmy shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. "Lena, you can't think. I would never. I helped set up the phone tree." "And who had access to the entire contact list?" Sheriff Valdez asked, her tone neutral and professional. "This is insane." Jimmy shot to his feet, his face flushed. "I'm a victim here too. They've been bleeding my auto shop for years." But Lena was watching his eyes. She saw the panic, but beneath it a flicker of something else. Guilt. She remembered something else, a detail from the night of the fire that hadn't registered fully. When she'd arrived, Jimmy was already there, his clothes clean, his face freshly washed. He'd said he came straight from home, but his house was on the other side of town. "Sit down, Jimmy," Lena said, her voice quiet but leaving no room for argument. He slowly sank back into his chair. She didn't accuse him. Instead, she told a story. "In Fallujah, we had a leak. Intel was getting out and men were dying. We couldn't find the source. So we planted 3 different versions of a plan with 3 different units. The one that got ambushed told us exactly who the traitor was." She leaned forward. "Last night, after the fire, I told 4 of you 4 different pieces of information about our next step. Only one of you was told that we were moving our meeting place to the library basement tonight." She let the words hang in the air. Jimmy's face went ashen. He knew. Sheriff Valdez's phone buzzed. She looked at it, then at Jimmy. "I just got an anonymous tip. a credible threat against the library tonight. She looked at Lena. Which was the piece of information you gave to Jimmy? The room erupted. Shouts of traitor and you got Jace killed filled the air. Tommy Rodriguez looked like he wanted to leap across the table. Lena raised a hand, silencing them. All her focus was on the broken man before her. Why, Jimmy? Tears welled in his eyes. They have my boy. He choked out the confession, a torrent of despair. My son, Kevin. He got mixed up with them a year ago. Small stuff at first, then he was in deep. Viper has him. He said he'd send me pieces of him if I didn't cooperate. The fire, the information, I had no choice. He put his head in his hands. Jace was a good kid trying to get out. I gave him up. I sent him to his death. I can't live with that. The anger in the room evaporated, replaced by a grim understanding. He wasn't a monster. He was a father, cornered and broken. The group looked to Lena. What was the justice here? Hand him to the sheriff? Let the community mete out its own punishment? Lena made her decision. It wasn't about mercy. It was about strategy. Viper thinks he owns you through your son, she said, her voice firm. He thinks that makes you a reliable tool, but a tool that's been exposed is useless. Right now, your son is a liability to Viper. We have to make you more valuable to him alive than dead. She laid out a new plan, a dangerous gambit. Jimmy would stay in place. He would continue to feed Viper information, but it would be information they controlled. He would become a double agent. You will tell Viper that the library threat forced us to change our plans, Lena instructed. You will tell him we're scared, that we're fracturing. You will make him overconfident, and you will find out where your son is being held. It was a risk. Jimmy could betray them again, but it was the only play that offered a chance to save his son and strike back at Viper from the inside. As the meeting dispersed, Jimmy grabbed Lena's arm, his grip desperate. Thank you, he whispered. I'll make this right, I swear it. Lena nodded, but her eyes were hard. This isn't forgiveness, Jimmy. This is tactics. Don't make me regret them. That night, Lena stood alone behind the bar, the weight of command heavy on her shoulders. She had just leveraged a man's paternal love as a weapon of war. She had stared into the abyss of a moral compromise and not flinched. The line between the healer and the warrior was blurring, and she was no longer sure which side of it she stood on. The battle for the town was becoming a battle for her own soul. With a mole now turned into a weapon, Lena prepares to lead Viper into a trap. But when Jimmy's next message arrives, it contains a chilling detail that changes everything. Viper isn't just in the next county over. He's already here, hiding in plain sight. The message from Jimmy was brief, sent through a secure channel they'd established. He's here, in town. Has been for weeks. He's the one we never suspected. Lena's blood ran cold. Viper wasn't lurking in a shadowy headquarters in the next county. He was walking among them. He had been watching, planning, and manipulating from inside the bubble of their own community. The audacity of it was staggering. It meant every conversation, every plan, every moment of vulnerability had potentially been under his gaze. She met Jimmy in the auto shop after hours, the air thick with the smell of grease and fear. He was a nervous wreck, his hands shaking as he wiped them on an oily rag. He showed me a picture he took of Kevin through my kitchen window, Jimmy whispered, his voice cracking. He was drinking my coffee, Lena, in my house. He said if I didn't confirm the library info was a lie, he couldn't finish. What does he look like? Lena asked, her voice dangerously calm. I don't know. He wore a mask, a ski mask, but his voice, it was calm, educated. Not what you'd expect. He said, a serpent is most effective when it's already in the garden. Then he told me to give you a message. Lena's eyes narrowed. What message? He said, the good doctor sends her regards. The good doctor. The words hit Lena like a physical blow. Her mind raced through the faces in their community, landing with sickening certainty on the one person who fit that description. The one person whose presence had always felt slightly too convenient, too perfectly aligned with her own arrival. Dr. Isabel Evans, the VA psychologist, the one who had been so helpful, so understanding, the one who had studied their support group, asking detailed questions, gaining everyone's trust. She had access to everyone's vulnerabilities, their trauma, their fears. She had been perfectly positioned to identify every pressure point, to identify Jimmy's weakness, to know exactly how to break them. It all made a horrifying sense. Viper wasn't just a thug. He was a strategist who used information as his primary weapon, and Dr. Evans was his intelligence arm. Lena didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, she began to weave a trap of her own, using Viper's own arrogance as the bait. She called a public meeting at the town hall, a show of force for the community. She stood before them, projecting a mask of defiant confidence. "We know who he is," she announced, her voice ringing through the hall. "And we're done being afraid. His power is an illusion. This town belongs to us." It was a performance, a grand play for Dr. Evans's benefit. Lena was the spotlight, drawing all of Viper's attention onto herself, making him believe she was the proud, overconfident soldier about to make a fatal mistake. After the meeting, as the crowd dispersed, Lena made a show of pulling Frank and Sheriff Valdez aside, speaking in a low but deliberately carrying voice near where Dr. Evans was packing her notes. "It's happening tomorrow night," Lena said, a feigned excitement in her tone. "The transfer. The feds are taking Jack Slade to a federal facility at midnight. They're using a decoy convoy, but the real transport is going down the old mining road. It's our chance." With Jack's turning state's evidence, Viper's whole network collapses. It was a complete fabrication, but it was a bait tailor-made for a predator. It offered Viper a chance to eliminate the key witness against his nephew, and to deal a crippling blow to the federal case, all in one stroke. That night, Lena, the sheriff, and a select group of veterans positioned themselves along the dark, deserted mining road. The air was cold and still. They didn't have to wait long. Just before midnight, the rumble of motorcycles cut through the silence. Not a dozen, but over 20 bikes, their headlights off, rolled like ghosts into the predetermined ambush point. They surrounded a lone, unmarked sedan they believed was the transport vehicle. This was it. Viper had taken the bait. From her concealed position, Lena scanned the figures, her heart pounding. She was looking for one person, the calm, educated voice in the chaos. Then she saw her. Dr. Isabel Evans, still dressed in her professional slacks and blouse, standing beside a massive Harley. She wasn't wearing a mask. She was simply watching, a clinical, dispassionate observer as her bikers prepared to storm the car. Lena didn't give the signal to move. Not yet. She raised a pair of night vision binoculars, scanning the tree line opposite her position. And there he was, a tall, lean man leaning against a tree, also observing. He was dressed in dark, tactical clothing, not biker leathers. This was the strategist. This was Viper. He raised a radio to his lips. Lena's earpiece, tuned to the sheriff's encrypted channel, crackled as his calm, educated voice filled it. "The serpent is in the garden," he said. "Take the bait." As the bikers yanked open the car doors to find it empty, a wave of confusion and panic rippled through them. The trap was sprung, but as Sheriff Valdez's deputies moved in, lights flashing, Viper simply melted back into the trees, disappearing without a trace. They had captured his foot soldiers. They had exposed his lieutenant, but the head of the serpent had slipped away, his identity finally known, but his freedom intact. The war was not over. It had just become profoundly personal. They had exposed Viper's operation and his key lieutenant, but the man himself escaped into the night. Now, with his network crumbling and his identity known, Viper has nothing left to lose. His final move won't be a strategic play for power. It will be a raw, personal act of vengeance aimed directly at the person who destroyed it all, Lena. The failed ambush on the mining road had cost Viper dearly. With a dozen of his remaining loyalists in custody and Dr. Evans facing a mountain of conspiracy charges, his criminal empire was in ruins. But as Sheriff Valdez had warned, a cornered snake is at its most dangerous. With nothing left to lose, Viper's strategy shifted from calculated domination to pure, unadulterated vengeance. The target was clear, Lena Vance. He didn't hide this time. 2 nights after the mining road incident, he walked right into the dusty spur during the busy Friday night crowd. The room froze. He was exactly as Lena had seen him through the binoculars. Tall, lean, and dressed in dark, practical clothing that screamed of military or law enforcement training. His face was sharp, his eyes cold and intelligent. This was no simple thug. He didn't look at the terrified patrons. His gaze was locked on Lena behind the bar. "Sergeant Vance," he said, his voice calm and conversational, cutting through the silence. "You've been a remarkable adversary. You dismantled in months what took me years to build. I respect that, which is why I'm here to offer you a choice." Lena stood perfectly still, her hands resting on the bar. "You're in no position to offer anything, aren't I?" Viper smiled, a thin, cruel expression. "The boy, Kevin Patterson, Jimmy's son. My men have him in a location not even Jimmy knows. You come with me quietly right now. You face me one-on-one. No cops, no community mob. Just the warrior you pretend to be. You do that and I let the boy go. You win, you both walk away. You refuse." He shrugged. "Then the boy disappears forever and I burn this town to the ground, starting with this bar and everyone in it." It was a classic terrorist's dilemma. Sacrifice yourself for the innocent or let the innocent pay for your survival. The entire bar held its breath, waiting for her answer. They were all hostages now. Lena knew it was a trap. He had no intention of letting anyone go, but she also knew he had correctly read her code. She would not let an innocent boy die for her war. "Where?" she asked, her voice flat. "The old sawmill. 1 hour. Come alone." He turned and walked out, the door swinging shut behind him. The bar erupted in protest. Frank begged her not to go. Sheriff Valdez, who had been called by a frantic patron, arrived and insisted it was a suicide mission, that they could set up a perimeter. Lena shook her head. "He'll have scouts. If he sees any of you, Kevin is dead. This is the only way." She looked at Frank, then at the sheriff. "But I'm not going there to play by his rules." An hour later, Lena Vance walked alone down the overgrown path to the derelict sawmill, a solitary figure in the moonlight. The building was a skeleton of rusted metal and rotten wood. As she stepped into the vast open main floor, she saw him. Viper stood in the center, a predatory smile on his face. Tied to a support beam nearby was a terrified Kevin Patterson. "The honorable soldier," Viper mocked. "So predictable." "This isn't about honor," Lena said, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. "It's about efficiency." She didn't wait for him to make the first move. She charged. The fight was not the cinematic brawl of movies. It was a brutal, ugly struggle for survival between two highly trained individuals. Viper was good, faster and more technical than she had anticipated, using his longer reach to his advantage. He fought with a cold, analytical precision, aiming to disable and dominate. But Lena fought with something else, the raw, unleashed fury of a protector whose home was threatened. She absorbed a blow to the ribs that made her gasp, but used the opening to slam her forearm into his throat. He staggered, his cool facade cracking into rage. He pulled a knife. "I should have done this from the start," he snarled, lunging. This was what Lena had been waiting for. As he committed to the thrust, she sidestepped, grabbed his wrist and drove him forward, using his momentum to slam his head into a heavy, rusted saw blade mounted on a table. There was a sickening thud. He dropped to the ground, unconscious. It was over. As she untied a sobbing Kevin, the perimeter Viper never thought she'd bring exploded into action. Sheriff Valdez and her deputies, who had used the town's forgotten storm drain system to approach completely unseen, swarmed the building. Frank and the others were right behind them, having followed Lena's discreetly dropped trail markers. They hadn't let her fight alone. They had become her backup. Viper Morrison was taken away, this time for good. With Kevin's testimony and the evidence piled against him, he would never see the outside of a prison again. Weeks later, the town felt different. The fear was gone, replaced by a hard-won peace. The dusty spur was more crowded than ever, now a genuine community hub. Lena still worked there, but she no longer hid. Her tattoo was a badge of pride, not a secret. She led the veteran support groups openly, her own healing intertwined with the town's. One evening, as the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Frank joined her at the bar. "You know, you tried to hide from the person you were," he said softly. "But this town needed that person. Maybe you did too." Lena looked around the bustling, laughing saloon, at Mrs. Henderson serving pies from a temporary stand, at Jimmy and his son sharing a meal, at the veterans chatting easily with their neighbors. She saw the community she had helped save, and in doing so had saved herself. She wasn't just a warrior or a bartender. She was Lena Vance, a woman who had finally found a battle worth fighting, and in the process, had found her way home. The quiet Marine who wanted to disappear became the hero her town needed, proving that sometimes our greatest battles lead us to exactly where we belong. If this story of courage and community resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe for more tales of ordinary people discovering their extraordinary strength.